When the world is just too much, turn it off and turn on positive, encouraging K-Love.
I'm gonna praise.
World off. K-Love on.
K-Love is sunshine for my soul.
I love K-Love.
Listen now on your radio, online, or on the free K-Love app.
K-Love makes me feel so good.
Positive, encouraging K-Love.
Hey everyone, I have a really fun announcement again today beyond the big screen and the History of the Papacy podcast. Of course, are members of the Parthenon Podcast Network. Of course, we're not the only members. Our captain, so to speak, is Scott Rank of the History Unplugged podcast. I'm sure most of you are aware of Scott and his podcast, History Unplugged. Scott has been a multiple-time guest on both Beyond the Big Screen and the History of the Papacy podcasts. In History Unplugged, Scott presents history from a variety of perspectives, genres, and eras. Today I'm going to share with you just a little snippet of an episode Scott produced on Alexander the Great's post-war plans had he survived. I really think you'll enjoy it. If you want to learn more about History Unplugged, how to subscribe, and much more, head over to parthenonpodcast.com or look for many great links in the show notes. Talk to you soon.
And Alexander wept, seeing as he had no more worlds to conquer. That's a quote from Hans Gruber in Die Hard, which is a very convoluted paraphrase from Plutarch's essay collection Moralia. Without getting into the accuracy of the sourcing, there's plenty of truth in that unattributed quote from Mr. Gruber. Alexander the Great's death in 323 BC in Babylon marked the end of the most consequential military campaign in antiquity. He left behind an empire that stretched from Greece to India, planted the seeds for the Silk Road, and made Greek an international language across Eurasia, all in 13 short years. He became and remained the biggest celebrity in the ancient world, but was probably only replaced by Jesus a few centuries into the Christian era. But what if he hadn't died as a young man? What if he had lived years or decades more? How much more influence could he have had? We have clues about Alexander's plans for the future, and they mostly come from Greek chroniclers like Diodorus and Arrian, writing centuries after his death. They include conquering the Mediterranean coast all the way to the Pillars of Hercules, building a tomb for his father Philp that would have been as large as the Great Pyramid of Giza, and transplanting populations from Greece to Persia and vice versa to unite his domains through intermarriage. There are many more plans Alexander had, including possibly circumnavigating the Arabian Peninsula and Africa, and to explore all of these hypotheticals and see how plausible they were or weren't is Anthony Everitt, author of Alexander the Great, His Life and Mysterious Death. We look at these very far-flung plans that also include building a road from India back to Greece and considerably jump-starting the development of the Silk Road, along with a massive temple-building program in Troy, Athens, and elsewhere, and a whole bunch of harbors and ports that would have been built throughout the Mediterranean world. Was there a master plan to all of these ideas that Alexander had, or was it just part of the tornado of ambition and energy that defined his prolific but short life? With all these questions in mind, we look at the life of the most influential person in antiquity and ask what would happen if he had even more influence. Hope you enjoyed this discussion with Anthony Everitt. We're going to look in detail about the plans that Alexander had after his conquest of much of Eurasia. But before we do that, I think it's worth getting into the mind of Alexander. What was his understanding of the world, of the Near East, of the Middle East, of the Indus River Valley? Were his understandings of the world formed by Herodotus, or was it all terra incognita to him? What did he understand about the world?
I think that he understood this, that the world was essentially water, oceanus, ocean, but that in the center of either a disk or a globe, there was the Mediterranean, the Middle Sea, surrounded by territories. And when he marched to India, he was expecting to arrive at ocean pretty much immediately, and was disappointed to find that, in fact, the land went on and on and on. So that was, I think, the basic notion. And it was therefore quite reasonable, in a way, for Alexander an ambitious man, if ever there was one. The world, the universe, was a fairly simple and rather small thing, with the ocean wrapping round the central disk of Earth. And it was quite reasonable, really, for Alexander to suppose that he might be able to conquer it all. It seemed to him a perfectly rational proposition.
Now, I'm curious how far east you wanted to go. And by asking that question, I should also point out that the chronicles we have of Alexander, some are written close to his lifetime, others are written much later. And then that says nothing about the legends of his life that are probably more numerous than those of King Arthur. He's the greatest celebrity of the ancient world. So wild speculation goes hand in hand with almost anything that we know of him. But how far east did he want to go? And feel free to, use some different sources, some perhaps a little bit more fantastical, but fairly far away from the subject in question.
Well, the most likely rational answer to that question is that he expected somewhere shortly after reaching India, he expected to reach the end of the world. And of course, it was a great shock to him that he didn't. And it's an even greater shock to his soldiers. They just wanted nothing more than to go home to Macedonia, to their farms, to their women folk, and to their children, their families. And Alexander was not interested in that at all. And he and his men had a terrific row on the borders of India. He wanted to march on forever, and they wanted to go home, and they won. He did his best. He was furious, but he realized that he couldn't change their minds, and so he had to retreat.
Now, let's look at his plans on what he wanted to do next. And here I'm describing his future plans as noted by the Greek geographer Diodorus, and he's writing in the 1st century BC. This is later, significantly after the life of Alexander. So you can also discuss about how likely you think these actual plans are. Well, actually, let's begin with this before we talk about the particular plans. What Diodorus says, is there good reason to believe that his accounts of Alexander are accurate, or is he writing more from the vantage point of the 1st century BC rather than the vantage point of Alexander's time?
It's extremely difficult to say. Diodorus is an irritating historian because he basically copies the book he has to hand that covers the period that he's looking at any given moment. And he's as good as his sources. And it's quite difficult sometimes to tell what the sources are. It does seem to me that there is some rationale behind what we know of the plans of Alexander, although that they must remain speculative. It seems to me that Alexander wanted to enlarge his kingdom, enlarge the Persian, his empire, by running along a road, a thoroughfare, from Persian Gulf to the shores of India. And he would, this was the famous Arabian expedition. And the idea was that, as far as we can see, the idea was that he would create a trade route from India through to the Middle East. If so, that was a fairly perspicuous idea. And it was an idea that he then copied with this alleged plan to build a highway, a kind of motorway from Egypt right through to the Atlantic and to the Pillars of Hercules, that's to say, Gibraltar. And the notion being that he would build harbours and cities that would enhance the economy of his empire. Clever ideas, but whether or not he actually believes them does rather hang on one's feelings for or against Diodorus.
We're going to get into the particulars of what Alexander wanted to do, and then after the particulars, I want to examine whether these plans culminated in a master strategy or they were haphazard. What I mean by that, was there some sort of massive reform package like a Mustafa Kemal Ataturk of Turkey who did language reform, did legal reforms, and abolished Sharia law and adopted Western dress, all as a larger program of modernization? Or were these haphazard reforms like a 27-year-old winning $250 million in the lottery and buying a mansion, buying a zoo, buying a strip club, and there's no master plan. It's just endless possibility simply because he can do it. Let's begin with the plan that Diodorus says Alexander wanted to do of constructing 1,000 warships for an expedition against the Carthaginians and making coastal roads along the Mediterranean and North Africa all the way to the Pillars of Hercules and constructing the necessary harbors and shipyards. Could you describe this?
Well, yes. I mean, it seems to me, although we get only a very sort of brief account, it seems to me to be quite a rational project. Alexander has a reputation for not wanting to get down to the practical business of ruling, governing. And there is some rationale behind that. But after the revolt of the satraps, when he returned from India, many of his satraps had not supposed that that would happen, that he would get lost in the mists of the universe. So it seems to me that after that revolt of his rulers, he began to take more interest in the actual business of governance. It may be that part of that greater interest expressed itself in terms of an economic development strategy. And my only observation is that the plans that we know fairly solidly for the Arabian expedition, because that was ready to sail just before he died, those plans are, in a certain sense, replicated by the proposal that he build a motorway or a highway to the ocean, to the Western Ocean. So I lean to feel that he believed that he had a strategic point of view. But if so, it was certainly a novelty, because the early part of his expedition, it's not at all clear what his strategic aims were. And I think they gradually formed themselves with the development of experience of conquest over a number of years.
This also raises an interesting point that sometimes ideology comes after victories in battle, and this ties into research I've seen about the early Islamic Caliphate, where some historians looking at the first century of Islam wondered, were there really plans of expansion, or did those who were coming out of Arabia simply find that the Byzantine and Sassanid defenses were so poor and the regions were so depopulated due to plagues and warfare happening between Byzantines and Sassanids that they could continue their conquests unimpeded, and then it grew and grew. And then generations later, when this new Islamic Caliphate is trying to make sense of what just happened, they're putting the imprimatur of God or Allah on their conquests just to try to look back. Do you think there's any of that with Alexander's conquests?
That is what you've just said is a very astute insight into what may have been current in Alexander's mind. And I think that's the most interesting comparison, contrast between the caliphates and Alexander's own names. Alexander, of course, wanted to do everything in a tremendous hurry. Generations, the flight of generations was of no interest to him. He wanted to do everything now. In fact, I mean, I find as a biographer of Alexander that he's just so exhausting. His energy seems completely beyond imagination. And he's rather like having him in the house as a subject, not like having a sitting tenant who's permanently on the rampage. And it was quite a relief to get rid of him after the book has emerged. So, yes, I tend to agree that one can see, we can't be sure, but one can see the outline of a developmental strategy that suggested that he understood the need to develop a rational approach to the enlargement of his lands.
We'll talk more specifically about his plans to conquer in Europe and also his plans for navigation around Arabia, Africa. But I'm curious, do you think in the 4th century BC, would Alexander, or not even Alexander, any person in Anatolia or Greece, been as interested in Europe as people make him out to be? Because I wonder if this is the revisionism that goes all the way back to Rome, where the Aeneid imagines that the sons of Troy travel to Rome and set up the city there, and it's making Rome direct descendants of Troy. And there's this interest in trying to graft in Europe with what's happening in the 4th century. But I mean, economically, Europe is a complete and total backwater compared to Persia or India or these other Eurasian empires. Or maybe I have it wrong. I don't know. Would Alexander or someone like him been as interested in Europe as later chroniclers and historians seem to suggest?
I think that he would not have been greatly interested in the mainland Greek world. He did not want to go back to Macedonia. It was small beer. And also the approach to government in the Macedonian culture was much more the king being a first my equal. And if Alexander had ever believed in that in the first place, he certainly didn't once he'd taken over the Persian Empire. I think that it would have been a strategic mistake to have gone back to Macedonia to develop the government of Greece there. But apart from anything else, I should mention that his appalling mother was in Macedonia, and he did not, although he dearly loved her, it seems, he did not want to go back and come within her ambit again. I think that the notion of going along these North African coasts was then an intelligent start, bearing in mind that he knew nothing really worth talking about the northern shores of the Mediterranean up to Greece, which he did know about. So the notion of paying attention to Italy and to Rome seems to me to be a bit far-fetched.
When the world is just too much, turn it off and turn on positive, encouraging K-Love.
I'm gonna praise.
World off, K-Love on.
K-Love is sunshine for my soul.
I love K-Love.
Listen now on your radio, online, or on the free K-Love app.
K-Love makes me feel so good.
Positive, encouraging K-Love.
The Historical Jesus Podcast is the sweeping saga of the life and times of Galilean Jesus of Nazareth, as well as the faith, religion, and church founded to honor and disseminate his acts and teachings. Join me, Mark Vinette, on this fascinating journey through time, exploring the many great works of Christian theology, literature, architecture, music, and art inspired by the words and deeds of Jesus Christ.